Attorneys who federal courts call on to present or represent indigent defendants learn that they won't be paid on time. As Sabrina Wilson tells us, that includes lawyers in New Orleans.
When someone is accused of a federal crime but cannot afford to pay for a lawyer, they are provided one through the Federal Indigent Defender Program. This notice on the uscourts.gov website says as of the week of July 7th, the Criminal Justice Act panel attorney funds have been depleted. Further, it says CJA panel payments will be deferred until funds become available. That panel is made up of private sector lawyers federal courts hired to represent defendants when there is a conflict involving the regular indigent defenders. I asked Congressman Troy Carter of New Orleans about the situation at an event he appeared at with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and some other Democratic Congress members on Medicaid funding cuts.
And that's a part of this constitutional crisis that we face, because when you take away those tenements of our Constitution, people have the right to have representation. And when you take money away from those public defender organizations, people are going to suffer. Again, an erosion of our democracy.
Claude Kelly, the chief federal public defender for the Eastern District of Louisiana, which includes New Orleans, said in an email this was an announcement from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. Payments are deferred until funds become available. This is a nationwide, not just the Eastern District of Louisiana. We value the super work done by the CJA attorneys in our district.
Listen, it's certainly not sanctioned by Congress. As you know, the Article 1 of the United States Constitution clearly spells out that Congress shall have the power of the purse. This president doesn't respect that.
Our legal analyst, Joe Responti, said, I would think that a clear majority of federal defendants in the Eastern District of Louisiana and the other 89 districts in the United States are represented by private panel attorneys who are appointed to work for well below market fees and are now not being paid for the work they've already done and are being asked to continue to represent their clients, which I'm sure they will do with no assurances as to what will happen going forward with their fees. And the Washington Post is reporting that the administrative office attributes the pay suspensions to a spending bill Congress passed back in March. We were told by an affected local attorney that they received notification this afternoon that they won't get paid until October now. I requested comment also from House Majority Leader Steve Scalise of Louisiana and U.S. Senators Bill Cassidy and John Kennedy, but so far have not heard back. Liz.